You're listening to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse at bellydancegeek.com.
Okay, so it sounds like everybody can hear me, so let's get started. So first off, thanks everybody for coming. I'm really glad you're here. My name is Nadira Jamal, and this is the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a place where dancers can find the information that's hard to get in classes and DVDs. So in general, it's really easy to find information on the what, so things like movements and combinations and choreography. But it's a lot harder to get information on the why and the how, so things like dance composition, the music, the culture, and issues of professionalism in teaching. So every month I'm going to interview a different guest expert on a fun and geeky topic. And we'll always have time for your questions so you can geek out too. So if you think knowledge and creativity go together like chocolate and peanut butter, you're in the right place. So my guest today is Zari. Zari is the proprietor of the belly dance video site roxtv.com. She's been performing Middle Eastern dance since 1991 and perfecting the art of the self-respecting haggle from around the same time. Her corporate entertainment clients include software companies, wineries, banks, television networks, pharmaceutical companies, publishing firms, resorts, and casinos. Zari was schooled at the University of California, Berkeley, and has twice facilitated an accredited university course on Roxsharki in the dance program there. Her multiple research awards and scholarships have funded ethnographic dance research in Cairo. Zari's featured on 7 DVDs released by Cheeky Girls Productions, gigs constantly, and is continually grateful for the happiness which dance has brought in her life. You can find her online at zari.tv or on Twitter and Facebook as Zari Says Hello, all as one word. So tonight we're going to take our first look at issues of professionalism, and Zari's going to talk about what to do when clients ask you to dance for an hour. So let's jump right in. So thank you so much for coming, Zari.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So why do you think it is that clients ask us for hour-long shows?
Okay, so clients, when they, and I think mainly what we're talking about here to clarify for any listeners is we're talking about booking party gigs, which is a separate situation from, say, for instance, a restaurant owner who wants to deal with you dancing for 1 hour, because that would sort of be a talk show just on its own. As far as party people go, one thing that you need to keep in mind is that a lot of people don't really know they know the effect that they want, but they don't know how to get there. And so the reason that people ask for an hour, what they're saying to you when they ask for an hour is that they want something that feels full and round. And an hour is sort of that unit of time that is considered to be a bunch of time. You know, if they wanted a short show, they would probably ask for a half hour. It's that we're used to thinking in increments of hours. Particularly people who have standard day jobs, most of them get paid by the hour as well. And so they're essentially asking you to do one full job.
Gotcha. And so why shouldn't we just give them what they ask for? You know, they say the customer is always right. Why doesn't that apply here?
Because what they're asking for and what they want are frequently two different things. So I think we should give the customer what they want, but what they want is not necessarily going to be achieved by you dancing for an hour. So that's the biggest reason. The second reason is from your side. It's not good for you as an artist, because if you go out there and monopolize the party to that degree, the chances are that people aren't going to enjoy your show as much. And I think that performers do what they do because they enjoy helping people have fun and feel good and have a nice memory to look back on. So your job is to help facilitate that occurring.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you negotiate something more appropriate for a client who doesn't make the connection between what they want and what they're asking for?
Well, here's what I do. I figure that my role is to take that desire for a certain effect that I just talked about and to translate it and read it back to them, and then from that point get us both on the same page, and then take that journey together to arrive at what it is that we both feel good about they feel good about having, I feel good about delivering. So we already talked about what the client wants, having that full sense that something important, something significant happened. They want their guests to come away talking about, I went to this party and he hired a belly dancer and she was so awesome. And they really want to feel like they got their money's worth. So in terms of negotiation, what you need to stick with is helping people understand that the best way to get their money's worth is to listen to you as the subject matter expert. And also, you want to sort of take their requirements. So what you do is before you start laying down your policies and your wants, what you do is you interview the client and you ask them what it is that they're seeing in their mind. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So usually, like I said, they have this big splashy event in their head. What you need to do is manage those expectations. So they're probably not going to be standing around with a stopwatch. People tend to not really do that. Hopefully, you don't want a bean counter hiring you. But just in case they're looking at the video later, you don't want to seem like you're ripping them off either. So you could, and I know dancers who do this, you could just say, yeah, sure, I'll dance for an hour and get out there and do your usual set, and it feels like an hour in the moment. 45 minutes can easily feel like an hour. Half an hour can feel like an hour, depending on what's happening within that time frame. But that's not really ethical, so it's better to manage that expectation up front. What I do is I sort of call it performing triage, and I ask them a set series of questions. So I can tell you what those questions are if you think that having them specifically would be helpful to people.
I would love to hear that.
Okay. So the first thing I ask is I ask about what I call the lifespan of the party, and that's actually the same term that I use when I talk to people. So I say, what is the lifespan of your party? And they say, what do you mean? I say, okay, what is your start time? That's the first question. The second question is, what time do you have the venue until? Because we're talking about parties here, and even though a lot of parties happen at the home, they might also be happening in a banquet hall or a restaurant, a hotel ballroom, and those places are very strict on what time you have to load out. So I always check to find out about that. The third question I ask is about their friends and family, and I say, is your group usually on time? And there's a lot of jokes. Basically, insert any ethnicity, and they'll talk about like their adjustments to time. Like Indian people always joke about how Indian people are always late. Arab people talk about how Arab people are always late. Black people talk about how black people are always late. I can say that because I'm black. And I don't know, probably white people talk about how they're always late. Everybody's always late. So you're pretty safe in assuming that the answer is going to be no, my group's not usually on time. Mm-hmm. So let's just say that for the purposes of our demonstration that the start time is at 7 and the end time, they have the room until 11 o'clock. So that's 7 to 11, that's a 4-hour block of time. I advise the client at that point to allow a buffer time of maybe 30 minutes for guests to arrive, because even if everybody did show up at 7 o'clock, it's going to take them a certain amount of time to take off their coats, to say hello. If they have children, maybe they need someone to bring a high chair for the little kids. And it's not really realistic to start the show at the moment that the guests are walking in. Mm-hmm. Also, a lot of long format evenings will include dinner. So the next question that I asked, and that would be the fourth question, is what time is dinner being served and what format dinner is being served in, whether it's a buffet or whether it's being served to the tables by the catering staff. And this helps the client to understand that you're trying to assist them in getting their full money's worth. So the key point is that you want to convey that you're on their side. You're not opposing them. You're not trying to assert your own desires over their desires. In fact, you're actually trying to help them. And asking all these questions and letting them talk first helps them begin to feel that level of comfort and trust with you, that they can come to believe that. So we have this lifespan of the example party. It's 4 hours. People are arriving at 7, and then they have to clear out at 11 o'clock. Now, we've already ascertained that half an hour of that is just going to be people arriving and sitting down. So we're already down to, 3.5 hours. The next question that I ask at that point, after sort of making it apparent to them that I'm doing this math in my head, is I say, well, do you have any friends that like to go home early? And most people have some early bird friends, the people who have to get up early for work the next day, or the people who, have the children with them and the children need to be home or be in bed, or people who have a long drive to get back to where they're going to. So some of those people, they might cut out maybe around, say, 10, 10:30. So already you've got out of that 4-hour block of time, like an hour and a half of it is going to be time that not everybody's there. So you're looking at prime time of 8:30 to 10 within a party that runs from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. That is 1.5 hours. So having verbally walked them through this, the client is now beginning to see that although it felt like they had this really long amount of time to play with, really what they've got is an hour and a half, and if an hour of it is you on the dance floor, that's really, it's 2/3 of their party prime time, essentially.
That would almost be cheating the guests of, their chance to talk to each other.
Well, that's what I also point out. The music is going to be really loud while you're dancing, hopefully. I hope for your sake that the music is really loud. So people can't really talk. I try to ask about the layout of the room as well. And so if it's something where it's, somebody's house, then that means that some people are balancing a paper plate on one knee and they're kind of, squashed into this area that's not normally meant to hold that many people, and they've just got you to look at and they're trying to be polite. It's really overwhelming to people.
I love this way of approaching it. I think it makes it really clear that this isn't some kind of contest to get the best price out of you. It's you two being together on team. Let's have a great party.
Yes, and that you're helping them get their money's worth. So I also just wanted to hark back to the previous point that I made. When people ask you to dance for an hour, it's easy to get huffy about it. Don't they know that I'm an athlete and rah, 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 and an hour, and how dare they? But really, they're just trying to quantify your labor in the terms that they are familiar with, and they don't really understand. So to combat that, what I do is I also communicate with them, and this again goes back to the money's worth thing, that they are getting an hour of my time. And this is the thing that dancers take for granted, that sometimes we forget to communicate to other people, is that the time that you're on the dance floor is not the full-time commitment that you make. So they are getting an hour of my time, and this is just how I manage my own gigging business. It may vary for different people who are listening. But from arrival time to departure time, I block off 1 hour, and I explain this to them. And there are multiple reasons that I do this. First off, by blocking off 1 hour, it makes scheduling easier. Because I know, okay, from 8 to 9, I'm going to be in Fremont, which is a city in California, and I'm usually in Fremont from 8 to 9. There's a lot of people who like dancers there. Okay, but aside from allowing me to schedule myself, it helps them with their unscheduled occurrences. So it makes slippage okay. And a lot of the events that I do are family events. They're like weddings or engagement parties or someone signing the marriage contract. And if somebody's uncle stands up to give a toast, maybe you're standing off stage. Uncle gets up to give a toast. Uncle is super long-winded, blah, 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 I love you, blah, blah, from the time you were a tiny tot, blah, 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 and you're like freezing in the hallway. Well, I don't want to be that dancer that is telling someone to go nudge the uncle and, stop talking about how much you love your niece so that I can get out and dance. Like, I don't want to be that person, nor do I want to be that person who has that altercation where I have to cut the show short because you guys ran late. And if the show is supposed to be 60 minutes and I'm only there for 1 hour, there's no bandwidth for slippage. There's also there's no bandwidth for people who want to take their photograph with you. It sort of hinders your audience participation because you're always kind of like, looking at the clock to see if it's time to go, but you're still out on the floor. And it makes the disengagement process have kind of a little bit of a bad aftertaste, and that you want that good feeling to linger. You want them to have a good memory of you as you walk out the door.
Mm-hmm. It's been my experience that people really enjoy thanking you and telling you how great it was and, offering you some cake whether or not you can stay to have it. And it seems like that's a big part of the process of entertaining as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of a shame to rush that.
Yeah, I mean, your performance is so much more than the steps that you do. Like, if you have ever read anything by Judith Butler, I mean, this whole idea of performativity and that your performance is much larger than the time that you're on that particular dance floor. I also wanted to say about blocking off an hour of the time. I want to give, if I can I give another tip that helps in terms of communication and what I specifically say to people?
By all means. We love specifics.
Okay. So we went through the specifics of running down the lifespan of the party, and we went through the specifics of, but you are getting an hour of my time. Pursuant to that, there is also a lot of benefit you can gain by explaining what occurs within the hour from the time that you arrive to the time that you depart. So they kind of only see you when you're on the floor because they're probably talking to their friends or running around and trying to fix details or, making sure that the kitchen is running smoothly, all that stuff. So I let them know what my evening looks like when I arrive. So when I arrive, the first thing I do, I have to find a place to park the car. And that can take more time than people expect. So it's also a good idea to, when you're on the phone with them, ask if the place is going to be crowded, if there's a parking lot available, and if you need to get your valet squared away during the negotiation, because it's like shocking how much that can affect your timeliness. So, if there's a parking voucher that you need or a valet that you need to interface with, get that information from them. Then you need to check in. Then you need to go to the DJ. Then you need to give the CD, or I still use CD. I don't do the iPod thing yet. You need to give them their card. And so you can express to them that every single one of these things takes time, for which you're on the premises even though you're not physically dancing. And then another specific thing that I do with performing my shows is, and this gives a lot of security to people when I explain it to them, is that I build false exits into my music. And you know what I mean by that, right?
So places that you could leave.
Right.
But there's still more music on the track.
Yes. And so I tell this to the client. I say, you're always going to get a full show, which has a beginning, middle, end, and then there's going to be audience participation. And then for the audience participation, it's going to be an exciting song, and then a big bang and an end. And then after that, I have multiple false exits. And the reason that I started doing this is because sometimes people feel shy and they don't get up to dance with you until the very end. And then what happens is by the time they get their nerve out, there's like one bar left of the song. And they finally got up their nerve, and they're finally dancing with you, and then it just stops and cuts dead, and there's this that moment in the movies when you say something loud and the music cuts and everybody looks at you. It kind of feels like that. And I don't ever want people to feel awkward or embarrassed. I want them to feel good about the fact that they got up to dance with me. So I built that exit, and then after that there's more music, so that if someone got stuck out there, that they're not going to be, stranded on the dance floor. And I do that numerous times. So if I had to, my show could go up to an hour. I'll put 45 minutes to an hour of music just for that possible edge case where that could occur. Realistically, though, you usually won't need to use it, and you'll know once you get there because you read the crowd. And, I also explain to the client that every crowd is a little bit different, and deep down inside they know. They know if their friends are party people or if their friends are just going to sit and sort of chew their food and look at you. And they'll tell you that their friends are fun because everybody kind of is honor bound to say that, but they know.
There's fun, tells good jokes, and there's fun, can't wait to get out of their seat to dance. So.
Yeah, there's fun doing doing daredevil bungee, and there's fun a crossword puzzle. And some parties are crossword puzzle fun, and others are more like a bungee ride.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I have to say those false endings are brilliant. I'm going to steal that.
You've got to have them, and it makes me feel so much more assured. Because the other great thing about a false ending is that when Crazy Uncle Joe gets up and won't sit back down, and I think every culture has Crazy Uncle Joe. They're the one that you tell them you're a belly dancer, and they start yanking up their shirt, and I got the belly for it, I'll do it with you, and you're like, oh God.
And half of them can do belly rolls. Oh
my God. They're harmless, but loud. They're loud and persistent. With a false exit, you have your opportunity to sit him back down, and or sometimes it's just someone. Sometimes some people need to sit back down, and that false exit allows you to transition them non-confrontationally. It's okay, the song's over, that was the finale, and people will look at them with the expectation that they need to sit down. Mm-hmm. And they got, their attention, and they had a little bit of fun. So it helps you to transition people to the next phase where they need to be, and that is worth its weight in gold, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, understanding that you need that bandwidth helps you to communicate that to the client. And once they understand that, they're usually on board with it. I mean, really.
Excellent. Do you have any more tips for that piece of the process?
For the piece of the...
helping them understand what's realistic for a show length for accomplishing what they want rather than what they were picturing.
Yeah. I think the first technique that I mentioned, which is asking people specifically how they think the evening is going to play out, I think it's really important you do that first. Do that before you start talking about what you want, and that's sort of key to building trust. And then also sort of as they're talking, you can occasionally interject with how that would occur. And this is also a point where people will begin to uncover potential fallacies in how something may or may not be physically possible. I was talking to someone the other day and telling them how I had a caller who wanted a song, and I was like, okay. They wanted another song. I'm like, okay, I've got that one. They're like, and then the song changes, and you turn around, and now your dress is blue. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm like, okay, like, that is how movies work. But if I had not asked them specifically to describe to me, and that's the point, is that they're describing to me how that was going to happen, in their mind, they would have been faintly disappointed. Well, she came out, and I'm like, she didn't even change her costume. And they sort of had to realize that that's not physically possible without a time machine. So really, I mean, my biggest tip is just to listen first, and then, not just listen like you're waiting your time, but listen with the interest of interpreting what their needs are, and then repeat it back to them with a little bit of a dose of reality.
So it's almost like you're the architect or the engineer who's going to turn this general vision into a reality.
Yeah, I mean, I have a background in technology, and I actually did a paper once comparing the process when I went to university and started getting heavily involved with the dance department there and attending the meetings that it takes to put on really large, because it was also the theater department, really large-scale productions. I was like, this is just like planning software. It's pulling together requirements from people who have different skill sets, like the skill set that the client is bringing to the conversation and the skill set that you're bringing to the conversation as a dancer are totally different, with only a little bit of overlap most of the time. But you're also simultaneously, because belly dancers tend to book themselves, we don't usually have agents. We have to sort of put on our extra agent hat and take those requirements and translate them into something that's usable and actionable, which is the second important piece.
All without ruining the belly dancer mystique.
Oh my God, I don't know how we do it. I honestly don't, because it's true. And at the end of that, conversation, that's you that's got to walk into the room with charm and beauty and femininity just rolling off of you in waves. And it can be really awkward sometimes to have to take that sort of hard-nosed, pragmatic piece of you and bring it in a way that doesn't totally undermine this sort of fantasy, belly dancer vision that people also want to be coming from you.
Mm-hmm. So when you do get into those, tough spots, when they start haggling or really pressing you, how do you hold your own?
Oh my God. Okay, so that is something that is an ever ongoing process. And 99% of the time, my techniques work. For the other 1% of the time, I'm always sort of trying to think how I can get better at it. But generally, here's what's worked for me with troublemakers. The first thing I do is I ask myself why they're pushing on my boundaries like that. Because by the time you get to the bottom of this list of techniques and descriptions that I've given you, they don't really have any excuse anymore to be asking for crazy things. That's where you want to bring them to. You want to bring them to the place where they're not asking these things out of ignorance. And if they're a good person with, a nice heart, then they won't ask you for obnoxious stuff beyond that. If they are asking beyond that and they're aware that it's something that's not really appropriate to the situation for the reasons that you've laid out for them, it sort of turns into a situation where now they're pressing on your boundaries. So I try and figure out why that may be. Sometimes it may not be coming from them, particularly with corporate gigs. And with those, sometimes there are legitimate reasons to be asking a dancer to dance for an hour. I used to dance when I was in a Polynesian dance group. We did a lot of luau's, and because I used to do hula and Tahitian as well when I was in Los Angeles. And we got booked into a lot of public school events and also into a lot of nursing homes. And in both of those cases, the reason that they needed the show to be 1 hour long was because, A, someone else was paying the bill, their boss, and B, they had scheduled things around that 1 hour. So if you have someone who really needs an hour, one thing that you can do is recommend bringing in another person, and then you're sort of giving people a little bit of visual relief from just looking at the same girl for 60 minutes straight. You can recommend mixing it with a lecture. This works good if you have a gig at a school system. Or I also did some gigs at Beverly Hills Public Library, where I sort of would give a little speech and then do a dance and contextualize things. This will only work for audiences that are sober, so it's not always appropriate for parties. You know, if it's something like an educational gig, maybe, you know, it can actually enhance the show where you're like, okay, this song is about thus and such, or the reason that I'm holding a cane is, you know, because of X, Y, Z, and then they're like, oh, okay, it's not just a Fred Astaire movie gone wrong. Like, there's a different culture that dances with canes. Hopefully those sorts of situations would have emerged earlier in the conversation, and you can sort of adjust from there. But what you do is you make them a counteroffer. And, you know, by this point they're aware of how long it takes to prepare a 1-hour show, or how much of your time they're actually requesting, rather. I think that having packages on your site is a really good thing, specifically to avoid this kind of awkward conversation with somebody who's being a little bit pushy about the time. And can I talk quickly about the prices that I have on my site?
By all means.
Okay. So the prices on my site are, and I'm sorry, I keep pausing. I have a little bit of a frog in my throat today, so I'm sort of sneaking sips of tea from time to time, because otherwise I'm going to lose my voice.
Of course.
So having packages on your site is great. The reason is that it gives people a framework, and it sort of guides them toward the things that you are comfortable offering. The other thing is that if people are asking for this 1-hour show and being really persistent about it, what I do is I just would send them a counter offer and or an invoice for how much it would cost to dance for an hour. And usually when people see that, they kind of dial back what they're willing to accept. So that's a technique that you can try. But having packages on your site is one thing that allows you to do that, because they can refer to your site and see that you're not just pulling numbers out of the air. And I was talking about this with somebody that I'm coaching the other day, and I was sort of talking about how there's this cultural fear in most cultures that women are gold diggers, and that we don't want to pay for our own stuff, that we want other people to pay our way through life. Now, generally, I think that sort of comes from an attitude and an history in which women were not really allowed to earn their own money, and so if you wanted money, you had to get it through a husband or through a patron or somehow, and that women weren't really empowered to get their own money, but this attitude still persists. And there's this fear that women are, and belly dance is really glossed as a woman's job, right? Like, because most belly dancers are women, and belly dance also promotes itself as being this hyper-feminine practice. But there's this fear that we're sort of eyeing them up to see how much money we could get out of them. And having your prices on your site lets people see that you're not doing that you really have a legitimate pricing structure. And when you send that invoice, I would send the invoice, if your normal show is for 30 minutes, send them an invoice for 2 30-minute shows stacked on top of each other. And you will quickly find that most people are very willing to take a half hour after they see how much a 1-hour show would cost.
One thing that I found is that having your prices on your website also makes you look more professional, more like a business, rather than somebody who's just out there asking for money.
Yeah, there's different schools of thought about it. I was the first dancer in my area to really go full out with putting a pricing structure on my site. There was one other dancer up here who had, I think she had her price on her site, but I don't think she had packages to the extent that I do. And what I did was I put it up there, and everybody was like, oh, my God, you're crazy. People are going to undercut you now that they know how much you charge. And, isn't it crass? And I was like, well, I don't know. Let's see. Because it's the Internet anyway. If it's a bad idea, I'll just take it down. And, it's really no harm, no foul. It worked really well. Now, pretty much everybody seems to be doing it in this area. It's pretty much become the standard. And it really cuts down on haggling, in my experience. How about with you? Have you found something similar?
Absolutely. As soon as I put my prices up, I got fewer calls, but more of them were ready to close the deal when they called. So instead of trying to get me down on the price or saying, oh, well, let me call a couple more people first, they were much more ready to just go ahead with it. That may also, at the same time that I did that, I also intentionally put my prices $25 higher than most people in my area were doing. So that may have been a piece of it. I didn't test those two things separately. I think there's a certain amount of assumption that you get what you pay for, and if you're more expensive, it must be because you're better.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to separate those two things.
And, that psychology works with people who are willing to spend. And, people who don't want to spend, if they want to spend $50, they're going to spend $50. They're not going to spend $51. They're not going to spend $52, and they're not going to spend $200. So if your price is $200 and you drop it to $150, you're still going to lose that customer, But for someone who's willing to pay $200, they'd pay $150 if you ask $150, but if you ask $200, they'll give you $200.
Exactly. And I'm sure we've all heard the stories of, people who gave somebody a $100 discount because their budget was $150, and then they go there and there are ice sculptures.
Oh,
their
God.
entertainment budget was $150, but their ice sculpture budget was higher. So it varies.
Yeah, the ice sculpture, I'm like, wow, at my dance at the end, you're going to have beautiful pictures and people talking about you and bragging rights and the video to look at and, just something cool that maybe you didn't have a chance to see before. And with an ice sculpture, when it's all over, you're going to have a bucket of water.
It's true.
How fair is that?
Absolutely. So, you've talked a little bit about some of the legitimate reasons that people might try and haggle or push on the boundaries that you're setting. Do you ever run into less legitimate reasons?
Do I ever run into what?
Into reasons that are less legitimate? Do you ever get people haggling or pushing on you for reasons that aren't legitimate to the pressures that they're under? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and also just another legitimate thing, sometimes people just don't have money. But, what I find is people who don't have money, they know they can't afford more than a certain amount, and what they'll say is God, I wish I could afford it, but I guess I can't. And that's what good people do when they don't have enough money. They don't try and strong-arm you into making up for the fact that they haven't got it. And with those people, sometimes I'll just offer them the mini show instead and say, well, I do have this other lower price package, or, I might take their budget and work backwards from there and try and come up with a custom solution that maybe isn't on my menu, but is something I feel comfortable with offering for what they have to give. Conversely, people who don't have good reasons for haggling but just want to bully you are the ones who frequently have the ice sculptures that you're talking about, and they could afford it. So I know that it's awkward and uncomfortable to negotiate I think it's better to front load, get that unpleasant stuff, get it out of the way first, so that you don't even go there unless you know that they're going to treat you well. Because there's nothing worse than that moment before you get to the gig, the moment before you get out of the car. Tell me if this has ever happened to you, and bless you if it hasn't. But I've had those times where someone just kind of beat me up over the phone, and I got to the gig, and I've got my hair and makeup, and and I worked so hard to like try and make something nice for them. And I'm sitting in my car, and that split second before I know that I have to just let go of all my issues, let go of my baggage, like just be a professional and smile and find something to love about everything that's going on around me. But just before I slip into that mode, there's a split second where I'm just like, pardon the French, pissed off. And that's terrible. And you need to nip that in the bud, or the troublemakers are just going to run right over you.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially because, most of us, even those of us who are, making a good business out of this, we're not doing it for the money. We're doing it because we love it, and the money is what supports us and lets us do what we love. And it's really sad to have that moment of anticipation ruined.
It is. And, I put myself through college dancing, and I've been doing it a long time, and it does feel hurtful when something that you love is something that that becomes sort of, you always want to have that good feeling about that thing that you love.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips for shedding that ick feeling?
Buck it up and move. I mean, it's your job. So if I have it, it's for one split second, and then you let it go. And, you put yourself in that situation. You chose to take that gig, and you need to go into the performance part of it with the best attitude that you can.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know any
scream into a towel.
Beyond that. You scream into a towel?
Mm-hmm. When I'm angry or upset, I hold it in my body. So I'll jump up and down or scream into a towel, or if I'm somewhere safe, like in a car, I'll like swear under my breath and call them horrible names, and then make the horrible names look silly, and that turns into something I can laugh at. But I'll take it as extreme as possible, as kind of a way to show myself how silly it is, and from there I can go. But it seems like everybody has a different way of holding that anger and interacting with it. So I was wondering if you had anything.
I let myself feel it for a moment, and then I let it go. Like I do have that moment where I'm like, God, what am I doing here? And then, it's like, well, I'm here now. I guess I got to go do my job.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I should try the screaming into a towel thing and see how that goes for me.
Just do it before you put your lipstick on, or at least check your lipstick afterwards.
I just like picturing, like, someone's going to show up at the party and be like, I saw the belly dancer screaming in the parking lot. She had a towel in her face.
Yeah. I don't know if this is relevant either, but I'm in IT for my day job, and when we occasionally deal with very demanding clients. I'm at a university, and we've got Nobel Prize winners and people who have very high expectations. And one thing that I found is that the less reasonable someone gets, the happier and sunnier and more helpful and more professional I get. And that gives me this wonderful sense of superiority. It's like, yeah, you're acting like that, but I'm not going to fall for it. That just gives me this little lift. So,
interesting.
Mm-hmm. I got us a little bit off of the topic. We were talking about unreasonable haggling. Did you have anything else you wanted to say around that?
The best thing to do is just send them an invoice. I mean, really, like if someone wants, like, what's the equivalent of maybe 3 short shows stacked back to back, send them an invoice. And if they want to pay that, if you're willing to do it, then you're going to need more lead time for sure, because it's going to take longer to prep a show like that. I think that, communicating, trying to keep your cool, which, again, 99% of the time I manage to do, but every now and then you aren't going to meet someone that gets under your skin, but try to keep your cool as much as you can. And know, here's the biggest thing, you need to know what your boundaries are before people turn up the heat. So you need to think about these things when you're not negotiating. Think about, one of the questions that I was asking people recently was, what would it take for you to say no to a show? And the answer to that was astonishing. The range of responses that I got from people, I never realized that so many people have so different comfort zones with what they're willing to do. But whatever it is that for you would be a deal breaker, I think you should know what it is ahead of time. A lot of dancers have this I won't dance for bachelor parties thing. I don't know who all these bachelor parties are. I don't really get that many requests for it, but for some dancers, that's their only deal breaker. And I was like, really, you'll put up with anything except a party full of men? Because I can think of a lot of other things that you should add to that list. So make up your own list of deal breakers and know what it is before it gets to the point of being sort of a really active or heated negotiation.
What kind of things do you recommend considering for your deal breaker list?
Deal breaker list. For me, people who aren't willing to provide a paper trail is a deal breaker. Yeah, I don't understand these girls who are like, sure, I'll go dance at your party. And I'm like, what? Like, well, I'll just get the cash and I'm there. And I'm like, what? Like, that could be an axe murder. That could be, and there's so many things that could go wrong. And what would your recourse be? Most things that go wrong are not going to be violent or scary. Maybe it only goes wrong to the level of worst case scenario, you end up in small claims court. But what is your recourse? And without a paper trail, you have none. And furthermore, with the paper trail, I think people are a little more cognizant of being on their good behavior if they know that you know how to get in touch with them afterward. When I was first starting, I learned everything by falling on my face over and over. I made so many mistakes. I got jerked around, more than I really would have preferred. Because, I was in high school when I started dancing. I didn't really know that much about asserting myself in the adult world. And, I remember one time somebody booked me on a gig. It was, 50 miles away. I drove there, and the club wasn't there. They closed the club, and nobody bothered to tell the dancer.
Wow.
And because I went there on word of mouth, oh, yeah, sure, call this girl. Yeah, sure, I'll go, whatever. And, I just hopped in my car and off I went. No, not anymore. So lack of a paper trail. Another, for me personally, big deal breaker is people who will not pay in advance. What I tell people when we're on the phone is, and this is true, I don't even write anybody in my calendar until I have a deposit. And no, I won't hold the date. And certainly, no, I will not call you back if somebody calls and wants that same date. How would you feel if you called somebody for a service and you said, okay, I'm ready to pay you, will you come dance at my wedding? And the girl says, oh, well, I don't know, some dude, called me and, I have to call him first and ask if he wants me to dance at his party instead. I mean, that's just really unprofessional.
Not to mention that it's more administrative overhead for you.
How is it in your interest to do that? I think if they're going to book the show, I'm happy to talk to them about booking the show. But this sort of leaving it out in the ether, to me, I don't like that nebulous kind of feeling. I just want to know if I need to block off time for them or not. So people who will not give a deposit, deal breaker. People who won't pay in full before the show, deal breaker. I have a policy where people book the show, it's 50% down, and then 2 weeks prior to the event, the balance is due. And if they don't want to do that, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go and be chasing someone around, trying to get like the second half of my pay. It's totally undignified, and what's worse is it has the potential to make you late for your other shows that night. And your goal as a working dancer, I can't stress this strongly enough. Your goal as a working dancer, you need to maximize your performance time. There's only so many years that you get to perform. There's only so many days in a week that people have parties, and there's so many hours in those days that the parties can occur. And you need to be stacking your gigs. And if you're chasing someone around trying to, squeeze the second half of your deposit out of them because you didn't get it cleared away in advance, you might be late for your other show. And if you're doing that with everybody, maybe the second show they might not want you, or they might call you for breach of contract, or they might try and use that as a reason to pay you less than you already agreed upon. Mm-hmm. So, horrible deal breaker. Get rid of that.
Actually, I took a workshop with our and a half ago, and she dealt with a few issues related to that, and she had a line for this that I thought was wonderful. I'd love to stay later or whatever, but, it's really important that I leave on time for my next show because I would never be late for a client. I would never be late for you. It kind of puts it in this, these are my standards for you, not just for everybody else.
Right. Yeah, but the nice thing is that you don't even have to break it down to them to that point if you already got paid. It's it's a non-issue. So that's, for me, not getting paid up front is really a deal breaker. And, the only time that I've deviated from that, it just comes back to bite you. It's not that specifically, but I mean when you have a policy that you're comfortable with, if you deviate from it, that's usually a red flag that there's going to be other things about the gig that are problematic. Something that's not really a deal breaker but is also a red flag to me is people who call with very little advance notice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always bad. I mean, I've had some really great gigs that just, came with really short notice sometimes, but many times what it indicates is that people are disorganized or that they haven't really got the space to work you into the event, that you're sort of an afterthought. And many times those gigs are not that rewarding. An exception to that is when people have hired dancers all the time. Some families just hire dancers for all their parties, and to them it's just like ordering pizza. They call you up half hour later, belly dancers there, great. Those gigs, those are usually okay. But many times, no advance notice can really be something that you should raise one eyebrow and think for a second before you proceed with the conversation.
Yeah, that's one of my deal breakers. Largely because I'm just, I have so many things scheduled into my time, whether it's, performing or talking to somebody else or a session with my Spanish tutor or whatever,
Taking your unicorn to the manicurist. It could be anything,
Exactly. You're just carving out that space in your life takes energy and time, so. Are there any other deal breakers?
Another thing about stacking gigs that's really good is that after that first show, you get what I always think of as the high pro glow, and your energy level is higher. It's like you sort of bring that energy with you if you don't lose that momentum and you have several shows that are stacked up.
Mm-hmm. I find that I don't have a lot of experience stacking, but I also find that the length of time between makes a big difference. So I've had like a 3-hour break where I had, like an 8 o'clock show and then another at midnight, and that was definitely enough time to come down and get cold, and then I had to work myself back in.
Yeah, that does happen. It's almost like when you're taking a nap. I think I've heard that there's an optimal amount of time that you should take a nap, or you can wake up more tired if you wake up at the wrong time. I think you nap for more than 2 hours.
I've been there.
Something like that. Yeah, gigs are kind of like that too, like that downtime in between. There's definitely a sweet spot, and then after that you do kind of you hit that slump a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, having a snack sometimes helps.
Gotcha. Okay, well, believe it or not, we've been talking for an hour. Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't covered yet?
No, you asked me a whole bunch of questions. I hope I answered them all.
Oh, definitely, but we're also going to have some time for the listeners to ask questions too, so I'm sure we'll have some more. But, before we do that, if there was just one thing that the listeners were going to take away from this call, what would you like that to be?
I think that the one thing to take away is that you should believe in yourself as being the subject matter expert. And when someone calls you, you know yourself. You know yourself as a dancer, as an artist, as a businesswoman, and you know what you have to offer. And don't be afraid to assert that knowledge in the conversation. Don't doubt yourself just because it's awkward to negotiate with people, and just really believe in yourself.
Excellent. I think that's good advice for your entire life, not just for the call. Okay. So this has been really helpful and really interesting, but obviously there's a lot more to learn in this area. So if people are interested in negotiation and gigging and booking, how can they learn more from you?
Well, they can enroll in my course if they want to. I also, you can email me or find me on Facebook, or I guess those would be the standard ways of getting in touch with a fellow dancer.
Can you tell us about that course?
Oh, yeah. So this is something that's running on Rux TV, and it is a course on booking better gigs. So it's a hybrid course, which means that parts of it are online and parts of it are live. We have a couple of conference calls that occur over the course. It is specifically meant to be 1 month long, and I could have strung it out for longer, but I just really like to get people using the information as quickly as possible. So it's just sort of the benefits of what I've learned over the years, I guess, that I'm bringing to other people. It's fairly labor-intensive on my part, so I'm offering it again in February, and then I don't really have plans to offer it again for a while, unless something drastically changes, because I have a lot of other things on Rux TV that I also want to build out. So do you have any other questions about it? Or
can you tell us a little bit more about what they're going to learn or what the outcome is going to be?
Yeah. So one of the cool things about it is that I help people work to put together their own price lists and packages. And whether they post them or not on their site, I know that I was saying earlier, you should have them on your site. That's what's worked for me. Some people don't feel comfortable doing that, but I do think that you should always have that knowledge at the ready when you're negotiating. So I work with people to develop that, also relevant to the particular region that they're in, because the dance markets vary depending on where you live and operate. There are quizzes and conference calls and all sorts of other fun goodies, occasional homework. And if anybody who is in my course is listening right now, some of you, I'm still waiting on your Tuesday assignment. And Tuesday's not over for another 6 hours, so send it to me tonight if you haven't already. People who are in it can also, if you're in a sticky negotiation situation, if you want to call me and get my take on it, or, you're just trying to figure out a pricing strategy, you can drop me a line and I'll try and help you come up with the best way to address it. And I just try to be available for people.
And if people are interested, how can they sign up?
They can go to Rux TV, and there is a link in the catalog. There's a product link that is marked Booking Better Gigs, and that'll get you in there.
Excellent. And for those of you who are listening on the webcast, there's actually a link on the left-hand side of your screen that includes that. And when I click through, I see that the next session is starting on February 16th. So there's going to be some time to get ready. So I'll also send out that link when I send out the call recording. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the course or how to learn from you?
You keep asking me, is there anything else? And I choke every time. I
thought
I
that's
knew everything
not
that
you have
say.
to. That's I want to make sure I don't cut you off because you had so much good stuff.
I can't think of anything. And honestly, I'm on Facebook all the time, and you can find me there, or, through the contact form on Rux TV if there's anything that I've neglected to say that people want to hear about.
Excellent. Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to open it up for calls. For questions. So those of you who have called in by phone or by Skype, you can raise your hand by pressing *2. And for those of you who are on Skype, that's *2 on the Skype keypad, not *2 on your keyboard. And those of you who are listening on the webcast, you can type in your questions using the question box on the left. Okay, so if anybody's got a question for Zari, *2, or go ahead and type that in.
Question, Zari, why do you talk so much? I can't believe I kept you on the line for an hour.
No, this is awesome. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands yet, but it usually takes a minute for the webcast to come in. Again, that is *2 on your phone or *2 on your Skype keypad. And it looks like we've got a question from Kina in Boston. She says, "Hi, maybe you've already asked this, so I'm sorry for the repeat. I got in late. I get the inquiry for the gig. I talk to people about what they want. Everything sounds good, and I quote my rate. Crickets chirping. I've done some market research, and I think I'm in the middle for rates. Any thoughts about what it might be?"
Can you repeat that question? I want to make sure that I got it.
Absolutely. So the question part was, I get the inquiry for the gig. I talk to people about what they want. Everything sounds good, and then I quote my rate. And it's like crickets are chirping. There's silence. I've done some market research, and I think I'm in the middle for rates. Any thought about what it might be?
Well, it could be a few things. One thing is that it's true with this economy, some people just don't have as much money to spend. If that's the case, then what I recommend is let the crickets chirp for a second, and then you can, what I do is I let people know that these are the rates, that I have multiple packages that they can look at if they want to see something that is closer to maybe what it was that they had in mind. And then I also will let them know that if they have a specific budget that they need to stay within, that there's two ways to approach it. One is that they can order off the menu. The second is that they can tell me what they had in mind, and then I'll work backwards from the required results to come up with a path to get there. So if someone has a small budget, that I'll sort of take that and figure out what I'm willing to give for that. And that tends to make them open up a little bit more because they're like, oh, okay, like, maybe there is a way that we can make something happen. You usually can't bring that possibility up at first because when you ask people point blank what their budget is, then that fear, again, of being taken advantage of will sometimes enter into the conversation. But when the crickets are chirping, that's actually a really great point in the conversation to get that in.
Excellent. I know the question was for you, but if I can actually jump in for a second. I took some training on a different kind of negotiation, and it may or may not apply in a situation like this. But one thing that this trainer pointed out is that sometimes after you quote the number and there's silence, we often forget to ask. Yeah, but we also forget to ask them.
Yeah.
To actually make the ask. So what do you think? Or does that work for you? Or what would you like to decide? Sometimes doesn't get said. And so they may be
and actually
I
would do that first before I went about being like, well, maybe we can do something cheaper for you. I should have said that because sometimes they're just thinking about it, and some people are like that, like the wheels are turning and nothing's coming out of their mouth until they're ready to present you with the completed thought.
you have any sense about, this is my own question, do you have any sense about how long is reasonable for that pause to go on?
You'll have a sense from having talked to them before. Like some people are really rapid fire talkers, and with them, if it really stretches out, then it's like, okay, like that's significant. And some people, like for me, I'm just not really a very verbal person. Like I think better non-verbally. And so if it's someone who is a slow talker or something, then, kind of let it stretch out. If it takes longer than the amount of time that it would normally take them to get out, like 2 sentences or 3 sentences, which is variable, depending on their normal rate of speech, then I'd say at that point maybe you have something to worry about.
Mm-hmm. That's a good rule of thumb. Okay, Kina, if we have not answered your question fully, go ahead and type in another one. Or if you have another question, go ahead. Everybody else, if you're on the phone, star 2 on your phone. If you're on Skype, star 2 on your keypad. That will raise your hand to ask a question. And those of you who are on the webcast can type that in at left. Don't be shy.
I know this whole show sounds like I'm just really plugging Priceless, but I swear, like if you're listening, try it. Your haggling will become so much easier. It'll become so much easier once you have something, and you don't have to put your specific prices. It's fine to put a price range. I have packages that range within like, $350 to $550, and at least it gives people a sense of what the bounds might be, and it means that the $50 people go away, which is exactly where you want them. You want the $50 people like as far away as possible from you. So I highly recommend giving it a try. It's the internet, so you can always just pretend it never happened and take it back down again. You can deny as much as you want.
Does anybody else have any questions? You can press star 2 to raise your hand, or go ahead and type it in the box. We've got another note, which I think is from Kina, that says, "You've been great, thank you."
Oh, thanks. Great.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So the next thing I want to do is to ask the audience, what was your biggest takeaway from this call? What was the most important thing you learned, any aha moments, or anything that really tickled you? So if you want to jump in and share that, you can press star 2, or if you're on the webcast, you can type it in at the box at left. For me, it was the having false exits. I've done that many, many times, but mostly to make sure that I had music to exit when I plan to, not so much to possibly end the show on that. So I am totally stealing that one.
Oh, good, good.
Okay. Anybody on the call want to share your most important takeaway? Again, that's star 2, or type it in at the box at left. Price list with a big smiley. That person didn't say who they are, but thank you very much for sharing. Anybody else?
Oh, thanks, Mom.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any raised hands. I'm going to refresh the webcast one more time.
Great. That means that I answered everybody's questions. Oh.
Actually, Rosa's sharing. She says, Rosa, and I'm assuming this is Rosa in Maine, says, "I love the idea of telling people that you schedule an hour on site for them." That's a really good point, too. I like that one, too, Rosa. Okay. Okay, I don't see any other incoming points or questions. So let's call it a night. Thank you so much, Zari.
Thanks for having me. And
all right.
I wanna get some back issues of the Clubhouse. How do I get those? Because I got the one that you did last time. That was the first time that I've listened to. But
I actually close those down after a month. So as soon as the next one goes live, those go away. I do have some fiendish plans for the future, but I'm not sharing those publicly yet. So Zari, if you stay on the phone with me after everybody else hangs up, I'll tell you about my plans. But nobody else gets to hear just yet. And when I master my supervillain laugh, that I can do the proper wah-ha-ha-ha. But that's not happening yet. But anyway, so thank you again. This has been really awesome and geeky and practical, and I think that's the best combination. And thank you everybody else for coming. This is the end of our call, but the conversation isn't over yet. We've got a private Facebook group for the Clubhouse members, so if you want to keep talking and discussing what's been going on, you can do that there. And I will send out an email shortly, which will have an invitation to the Facebook group, as well as the recording from this call, and a link to the Booking Better Gigs course in case you're interested in that. I'm also going to include a link to our feedback survey. So if you have any suggestions for topics or speakers or any improvements that I can make to these calls, I'd love to hear that from you. Our next call will also be Thursday, February 21st at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. My guest is Maheen from the Daily Belly Dance Quickies, and she's going to talk about anatomy for belly dancers. I'm really excited about this one. And as always, the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse is the come on in kind of clubhouse, not the no boys allowed kind. So if you know anybody who would enjoy these calls, you can send them my way. They can join at taktaba.com/clubhouse. That's spelled T-A-K-T-A-B as in boy A/clubhouse. And this call with Zari will be available as a recording until Thursday, February 21st, when Maheen's goes live. So if you know anybody who needs this information, it's still going to be out there. And until next time, happy dancing!
Thanks for listening. For more geek-tacular resources, visit bellydancegeek.com.